Delicate Subject, Chapter 32. Jane had a lot to think about. She'd done what she'd wanted to do, accomplished an anti-Reaper coup in the form of taking down Cerberus. Now it was time to decide whether or not honesty was the best policy. She didn't have that much trust to begin with, but she did have a soapbox. Maybe she needed a motto. Shepard, not quite as bad as she thought. She sat and stewed for a good long while, grabbed a ball and started tossing it. There was pacing and eyes closed, forearm over the forehead worry. She could blow what tenuous shot at authority she had. She could make a point desperately in need of being made. Combing through news, she'd seen that the subject of indoctrination was twisting and burrowing its way through social fabric and practices. There had been murders of survivors of indoctrination. It might have been an excuse for some other grudge in any case, but it usually didn't happen to a sedate mother of three. But indoctrination wasn't happening to sedate mothers of three. It was happening to those in the military, those with value in terms of vital infrastructure. There were murmurs in place like Omega that those found to be indoctrinated were outright killed unless they could pay for the surgery up front. She made a call to Arya and confirmed this was the case. Shepard, this is Omega, not the Citadel. We don't have the medical facilities. This is a port. People are on and off every day, and these people are Batarians and Vorcha. What did you expect? If I get an endowment to Dr. Daniel Abrams in Morden's clinic, would you funnel people there for surgery and scans? It matters. If people are being caught trying to enter, some are already there. You're an obvious target. Arya's expression hardened out of habit, and then she relaxed. I know you well enough to not have to ask if that's a threat. I have a private scanner. Nothing yet on me or my people. But this is not a productive time to live. Crime and murder taking place through fear is not the same as crime and murder taking place through lucrative vice. I'll do it. At least the Batarians, I think, would be willing to head to the clinic. I can't speak for the Vorcha, but I'll encourage it. In exchange for your generosity, I'll let you know that there are rumors that you were the first detected case of indoctrination. The notification came from the Normandy, and you were nowhere to be seen for weeks. Arya did not have to elaborate. It had already occurred to Jane that there were many ways in which her peculiarly timed absence and the connection to indoctrination could have been made. Nobody on the Normandy needed to betray her. Her absence left a hole in a pattern, and all someone needed to know were the most basic of her habits. All of her patterns of contact to any number of people on the outside, easily monitored, could do it alone. Biometrics and docking patterns, these would not have been altered in emergency. Cerberus would have had enough agents in place to be able to determine that, and from there, that is valuable information bought and sold. Files about her from Cerberus had been illuminating. Terrifying, but illuminating. No way to plug all of those holes. The event horizon off the ship blurred into chaos quickly. Jane nodded. Yes, I was the index case. I'm trying to get out ahead of this if possible. It seems there needs to be some sort of public effort taken toward encouraging detection and recovery, and that recovery is genuine. Arya rolled her eyes. I also know you too well to think you'll listen to me when I tell you that's a terrible idea. But who knows? Your terrible ideas are entertaining. Get the funds to Abrams, keep them coming. I'll put in suggestions or a few good words at gunpoint. I'll send you funds for protection. Arya smiled. Pleasure doing business with you, Shepard. So if there were rumors, she had to choose. Arya wouldn't tell anybody, but distrust and assumptions of concealment were already out there. Eventually, Earth's government had authorized flooding Udina's apartment on the Citadel with knockout gas and conducting the surgery without his consent, based on new laws regarding representatives of government needing to submit to scanning and subsequent surgery, grandfathered in to include all members. That had resulted in them having to maintain him as a representative, although suspended, and not writing him off entirely as the law went through. But they wanted representatives to know that being a zoo exhibit would not exclude them. He was recovering. He was still an asshole and was expounding on his potential lawsuit from his hospital bed in Huerta. The Alliance and Earth governments on the whole disavowed any involvement with him and encouraged him to sue. Anderson was doing a good job at ignoring the circus. She decided she had to address the circus. She realized she wasn't in any sort of uniform anymore. All of her N7 gear had been lost after her death. She'd shed Alliance blues, and then she'd shed Cerberus insignia, and now she wore regular clothes and regular armor, whatever suited her. There was no dress code or insignia on the Normandy. There were remnants of ranks, mostly she and Joker. Everyone else was an independent contractor. But realistically, she still ran things as the Alliance would, and had while she had been under the Cerberus wing. So, she had a brig. So she chose a generic outfit in black. She favored black, so that was easy. No insignia. Military, but not clear which military. She fiddled with the wording, backed up a few times and corrected a few spots, but this was a moment to speak from the heart, from the head, and hope to be heard. This is Commander Jane Shepard from the Normandy. I helped defeat Sovereign and Saren at the Citadel. I died to an attack by a collector vessel. I was brought back to life at great expense. I helped destroy a collector base that was menacing human lives, and I believe ultimately would have menaced all life. Sovereign, Saren, collectors, they may seem to be different enemies, but they are not. Sovereign was a Reaper. Saren was an indoctrinated puppet. The collectors were indoctrinated and genetically modified puppets of the Reapers, so we all have one enemy. I died for the cause. I lived for the cause. I kept fighting. It is difficult to define an enemy that can wear any face, hijack any mind. I was indoctrinated. I was kidnapped, tortured, held for 7 weeks while indoctrination took hold, and without my team being brilliant enough to discover the source of indoctrination, I'd be a traitor to everything I believe in. My team saved me. My team gave the information to all species, and the spread of indoctrination has been stemmed, but not halted. There are more people to save. Our colleagues, our family, they're still out there. I am a human, and I've worked with Cerberus. They brought me back, but I returned from indoctrination after my surgery, and I took them down, considering them to be an organization that was doing great harm. I needed to prove to myself, to prove to you, that indoctrination did not rule my actions, that I had recovered. I believe in recovery. We need the courage to identify our enemies and work together as allies. I believe we can fight. I believe we can win, and we must do it together. We need every sentient being of every species focused on the task ahead, surviving, and defeating the common Reaper invasion. I'm releasing to the extranet what I know of Reapers. You've likely seen it before, but this is from me directly. I'm releasing what I know of indoctrination, the surgery to control it, and the risks. I'm releasing my before and after scans and my most recent scan. I get scans weekly. I will post subsequent scans as they occur. I'm using Spectre authorization to confirm my identity and the source of this information. I thank my team for bringing me back, providing the knowledge to bring so many back, and for sheltering me as I healed. I am healed. Others can heal. I'll be helping to found and fund clinics for scans and surgery teams to preserve our allies, to save our family. If you are denied service where you are, I want to hear from you. If you want to help fight, I want to hear from you. Your voices matter. Speak out, speak up, stand up, fight together. We need to be a team. Before she hit send, she paused and said, Edie and David, did you guys get that? Yes. Yes. Now that I think of it, asking people to talk to me directly might require hiring of a PR department, or depending on my unfathomable geniuses to help sort requests and send responses. You guys up to some fan mail? I would enjoy that. A simple subroutine would help route requests and formulate responses. Edie and I will confer on anything requiring your direct attention. Jane grinned. Have I mentioned I love you guys? Edie, take this data and please review it, add what you think might be necessary or take out what is unnecessary, and publish it. Set up a separate extranet identity associated with me to route all communication. She hit send. As an afterthought, she sent Garrus a message in a breathless voice. Hey, Garrus, you might hear something from Ballowing Command from stuff I said. Okay, bye. It took approximately 10 minutes for him to show up in the cabin with an immediate glare and hands out to the side in a universal, "What the fuck are you doing?" gesture, seen often on battlefields. When she didn't say anything but stared at him blandly, he said, I don't rate a conversation on this beforehand. You'd have told me not to do it. Short conversation. He looked at the skies, possibly praying to spirits, before he said, Yes, but I also could have been prepared to have my entire agenda flipped on its head, considering my authority flows from my presence on this ship. You'd have told me not to do it. You'd be just as upset either way. Now you don't have to feel bad about not being able to convince me. There are nuances here, Shepard. Really? Tell me about the ones I don't know about. Arya told me there were rumors anyway about my being indoctrinated. Tim guessed right away. It was one of the first things out of his mouth. I needed to choose when to make it public. I needed to do it alone. Why? You had to make the choice to protect me from consequences alone. I had to make the choice to accept those consequences alone. I needed to control when and how it happened. And you needed to be able to say you were unaware this would be the direction I'd take. You can assert that you wished to and advised me to protect my medical privacy. You did this because I'm not a good liar? She shook her head. I did this because you shouldn't have to lie. I tell you what, if you're worried about me, we won't leave this ship unless we're armed and armored in a group. Wait, you have that covered. You insisted. Your security is as good as it gets. I'm in harm's way. Yes, it's a changed political landscape, and I changed it. On the plus side, we won't be blindsided together by someone not just starting rumors, but getting evidence to undermine what we're doing here. I'm sorry I was indoctrinated. Garrus stared at her, taking in that potential insult, manipulation via guilt trip, and disingenuous lack of humility. He opened his mouth, and Edie interrupted them to inform her that the created identity had 134,994 unique replies. She felt a little sick and a little inspired. He glared. She shrugged and said, We're not dead. With a heartfelt Turian snort, he continued to glare. She asked him, Do you want a secretary or something? I have a fraction of that, but I do now have 5,328 requests from concerned Turians directly to my comm. Edie corrected him. It is now 7,944. He glared. She said, "Maybe Liara would rent out Glyph. You could have your own drone in Vakarian blue." He tilted his head up again, praying for patience, and said, "Karim, as always, I stand behind your choices. I'm too angry to say I'm proud of you. Maybe later." Her lips twitched, and she asked him, "Dinner?" Edie said, "Advisor Vakarian." Garrus sighed, his kindness getting him despite himself. "Please, Edie, call me Garrus." "Thank you. Garrus, David and I can help prioritize and sort responses. You can create responses to common questions, and we can handle a majority of concerns in that manner." Garrus stopped, and some of the glare left him. He said, "That would be very helpful. Thank you." "You can start with, 'Dear so-and-so, crazy bitch didn't tell me shit. Sincerely.'" Garrus almost laughed, but said, "Don't tempt me." She gave him a lopsided smile, and he stepped forward, pulled her into a fierce hug, kissed her, and said, "Not proud of you yet." "So, by dinner?" "Late dinner. I'm gonna be busy." "Yeah, me too." She recorded a few quick video responses at David's and Edie's recommendation and spent a few hours figuring out infrastructure and funding, authorizing funds immediately to Omega, to Dr. Abrams. Then she sat down to talk to Liara about a few things. Liara helped her with some funding, routing, and setting up coordination and scouting teams to help verify some of the more serious allegations of denial of service. Winding that down, Jane asked, "So, how go the plans for the whatchamacallit? It's been a whole 18 hours since you asked the first time." "I am known for my impatience." "I know a bit more than I'm saying, or I know what it says, but I really don't know what to believe." "Think aloud for me here?" "It's a very Shepard thing." "Uh-oh." "It's Prothean. At least, it was ultimately Prothean. It likely had layers of origin that I can't translate, but it appears as though it was translated by the Protheans. It's unbelievably complicated, and some of the descriptions sound encouraging, but it could also be a catastrophically massive trap or time sink." "Yeah, that does sound like my sort of thing. Could you get copies and ciphers to Edie and David and let them chew on it a bit?" "Yes, I can send them over. From what I can tell, this plan creates a weapon, and it would take everyone working together to make it work, but the catches are that it requires an unidentified component, the catalyst, and the plans themselves become quickly indecipherable without the context of the previous step being completed. I hate to recommend that we do this because it is, in a human saying, all our eggs in one bastard." "Basket. All our eggs in one basket, though all our eggs in one bastard also does sound fitting. I just muddled the cooperation waters for a little while, and I'm gonna have to deal with the backlash of indoctrinated Shepard. I would have made recommendations that you do something of the sort. There's always chatter about you, but this was dangerous chatter. There are too many rogue, indoctrinated factions out there ready to make sure you can't serve as a figurehead." "Yeah, I was getting that impression. It had come up. I just wanted to put it down hard. We'll see what happens. Thanks for letting me know about the Crucible. I'll feel better letting bigger minds than mine chew on it." "Of course. There is a lot to assimilate from here, but there's one thing of slightly more urgency. I want to go somewhere. Soon. I want you to go with me." "Go where?" Eden Prime. If I'm right, there was a Prothean stronghold there. It's near where you found the beacon. It's vague, and I have a headache trying to figure it out, but the wording is, behind the doors lie hearts that beat once a day, and each beat speaks of the future. What the hell does that mean? Protheans got poetic and cagey there. Very few records remain of plain talk because of the risk of indoctrination and infiltration. But I'm reminded of Ilos. Hearts that beat once a day? Stasis. I'm thinking that Eden Prime has more to be discovered of Protheans. It might be nothing, and the power might have failed, just like Vigil described on Ilos. But it might not. There might be Protheans in stasis there. It's poetic and it's vague, but it's less of a risk than trying to rely on the Crucible being our savior. Can you imagine a live Prothean to help explain all this? This is definitely a Shepard thing. Tell me when you want to go and we're on our way. You know, it's nice that when I say something crazy, you listen. It's not crazy. It's just your particular genius. Let's go see. It would take 2 days for Liara to wrap up here, but then they'd set course for Eden Prime. She'd started to work on making her responses to incoming query as personal as possible. The process was revealing. Edie and David suggested video responses to all messages based on stock information she could record, and then Edie manipulating her recording into address to the person by name. So her attempt at making things personal was kind of creepy, but hopefully it was the thought that counted, because the now 231,290 responses were not going to be able to be answered individually, and at least having Edie make an attempt at personalization would be better than letting responses drop through the cracks. Edie and David assured her they didn't actually need her at all in order to formulate responses, plans, or concrete establishment of clinics. Oh, she only panicked for about 3 seconds. Edie and David being in charge would be fine, and she did, in fact, get more sleep based on how often they handled minor issues before they became major problems, requiring her attention. Edie routinely found terrifying things on freight checks. David routinely fended off any number of attempted data infiltration attacks on the Normandy, along with Edie. She thanked them for being on her side and recorded some responses. She wasn't going to do any interviews. Reporters got answers to submitted questions the same way anybody else did. Average correspondents were heartfelt, respectful, and sparked the idea of starting militia. It seemed that people were willing to follow her specifically and did not trust the governments. Interesting. Reporters were the ones told often, "I will not engage on speculation on certain subjects. Please resubmit any questions you felt went unanswered into more concrete terms." Many people were reassured that she did not believe that indoctrination could be transmitted sexually. See, it wasn't just her. Thane found her, and she realized she'd slipped and missed a meal. He set down a plate for her, kissed the side of her throat, and massaged her tightening shoulders. She paused where she was, ate a few bites, and then set it aside, tipped her head forward, and made appreciative noises. He lifted her from her chair with hands at her waist, stood for a long moment with her pressed back against his chest, his hands at her hips. He led her over to the Ponifa table, and they took their accustomed positions. The game was partially started, and she was getting better. Not to the point where she was approaching winning, but to the point where the games took longer, and it appeared he had to concentrate at times. She smiled. He smiled. They bent their heads to reacquaint themselves with the game, or at least she did. Drill memory was a definite advantage. She asked, "You can remember every board, every move, even if spaced far apart? Can your mind edit out me, for instance? And can you visualize the game playing itself without the context?" He looked mildly surprised. Of course. You cannot? She shook her head. No, I cannot. He tilted his head, brow raised slightly, and said, Curious. No wonder you must so often take the direct approach. She grinned. The immediacy of one move without the context of all others does seem to shape the experience of my life. He made a careful move to follow hers, and she began to feel the trap closing in, though she couldn't identify it yet. She didn't have long, if she was right. He didn't necessarily have tells, just a receptive attention to the game, but that he was gonna win was the expectation and undeniable reality. So she wasn't being all that impressively prophetic. He said, Occasionally, direct moves with the overwhelming power of the board one dominates can halt 1,000 subtler schemes. She smiled and considered that although she was going to lose, he would make it worth her while. They hadn't discussed it, and although she appreciated his strategy, she knew the difference between reality and a pawnee for board. When something had to be done, she'd do it and deal with the consequences. Not a surprise to him. Garrus was proud of her, and this was Thane telling her he considered her move of revealing indoctrination to be barely worthy of notice or comment. In character, strategically Shepard. Something he had observed enough in her to gain faith that she would deal with either positive or negative outcomes in her own Shepard way. It was only 7 more moves before he claimed the game. When he reset the pieces, he said, I must leave. I have 1,000 subtle schemes to launch. The declaration was not unexpected, and she knew Drell lives weighed heavily on him, as they should. He would deal with this in his Thane way. It was dangerous, and she had 1,000 worries. She would give him the same gift he gave her. Faith. Her eyes met his, and she said, Play a few moves with me? Did you know that looking at the unfinished pawnee for game that sat here prominently after my return was a comfort to me? His smile warmed. I did not know, but I had hoped. She contemplated the board. I stared at it long enough to realize exactly how I was going to lose. You should know that by simply realizing the identity of your opponent. She made her ever-hopeful moves. That does not sound like something I would do. After a few more moves, enough to make certain the board was in dedicated use, possibly a puzzle for her to unravel, possibly an expression of his impatience, he stood and lifted her, sat and held her in his lap, fingers in her hair. She asked, Phaetos is going with you? He nodded and said, David and Jack assured me she is no danger to me. In review of their discussions and after speaking to her, I believe them. I am Mesari Parnak to her. She has no love for me, but she has convinced me of her sincerity in wishing to see if what I offer as an opportunity is true. She has been shown what indoctrination is, and she does not doubt it. She has been released from the brig. She will spend time with Jack in her quarters before we depart. You are best Tyron. Their compasses will point unerringly to you. They will follow. His mouth was along her throat as he whispered, Car Ivalas, Sia. That he was leaving would have to be a compartmentalized impossibility, that she would have to bear the physical and emotional withdrawal from him without complaint was folded into that darkness. She turned to face him, spread her fingertips along the delicate curves of his frill, and kissed him, wishing she had a Drell's memory, taking the opportunity to surge forward into the stream of addiction and need before it was taken from her. Garrus brought everyone a late dinner, even fruit for Thane. She didn't know how to do that. Had Garrus insisted on making it himself, or did he know where to find Thane's stash? He'd probably fed Phaetos for a week. I need to figure out how to do that. I find I'm vaguely jealous. No, I'm not preparing food for Thane unless he asks. I know enough. That reminded her she should order peaches and steak while they were this close to Earth. She should get Tim's recommendations. They spent the evening telling stories of work challenges, Taurian outrage, Drell intransigence, human foibles, indoctrination, and the possibility of finding live Protheans. They mulled over the implications of an expensive, complicated anti-doomsday device. Garrus was of the mind that they needed more information and that it was a foolhardy risk. Thane was of the opinion that he needed more information. They cleared the table together, Garrus glancing at the Pawnee for board and saying, "I see Shepard screwed again." She grinned, and Thane said, "Let her determine how." She shrugged. "That's all I ask. Let me determine how I'm screwed. Then let me start over." She'd lost her words 6 hands together, and the knowledge of separation had built into unheard murmurs and hard hands, soft strokes, depths of driving into bodies as though to defy the knowledge of having to leave. Thane left her sleep and sex rumpled in Garrus's arms, venom and reverie racing home in his embrace. Thane placed his hand over her bare shoulder, fingers spaced, and kissed her goodbye, murmurs of well wishes between them, admitting no fear. She gripped his hand as he leaned to kiss Garrus as well. He murmured, "Keep her safe in Vasnam, and may I find you both here, like this, on my return." Nobody knew when or where that would be. She didn't ask. He wouldn't know. She did not hear his retreating footsteps, only the hiss of the door. She was grateful for Garrus's arms around her, so she did not fall to the temptation to run to the door and put her fingers on the metal. She arched back against hard plate and embraced the gratitude of Garrus's sheltering body and spirit. She didn't want to talk about Thane because the unbearable fragility of his leaving trembled on lips and eyelids. She'd feel compelled to say she was afraid for him, but in reality, she wasn't as afraid as she was selfishly longing to anticipate his arms around her, his voice in her ear, his hands on her hips. Garrus purred a consoling hum, felt through her skin, communion in missing the man. She said with her sudden pang of doubt and worry redirected, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was trying to protect you, and I didn't realize the risk of undermining you. I fucked it up." He roughened his purr and said, "Don't apologize. If there are things that Turians appreciate, Karim, they are responsibility for personal actions and respect for the chain of command." Grief and loss and fear were in her blood. They were tempered with reverie, and she could manage it, but she was still overwhelmed, and she said, "Please forgive me, Garrus, for what I've done to you, for what I've done to him, whatever my intentions." His purr melded into sounds of comfort and solace. "You are forgiven. If you take forgiveness, you must also take thanks for what you've done, for who you are. You teased with your silly announcement. I admit I just wanted to see you, kiss you, tease you back and tell you I was proud of you. You admit you'll miss him while you're in my arms, and I will miss him too." Doesn't sound like that's me taking personal responsibility. Well then, chain of command. I just managed a week without both of you. It was rough. I can give you some pointers. I outrank you on the subject of both of you missing." She eased a bit in her panic, his easy way of accepting awful things. And she was briefly distracted by saying, "You should have stayed with us." "But I really wanted to be in charge. Outrank you." "That is a selfish reason to deny me Garrus for a week." His hand skimmed over her hip, talons scratching along his skin in a distracting caress. Thane wanted me in the ceremony, and he wanted me to stay for the week." She was still, a thin sluice of shock in her blood as she said, "Why didn't you?" "When I saw the looks on your faces when I came to pick you up in the shuttle, I was torn between it being completely worth it and being viciously jealous. But I did it less for you and more for Thane. It was his moment, his clan to claim, his bond to you. At first he only wished Senny for you, but I suggested he tell Maril who he was, what he was doing, and ask her to bind you both." She closed her eyes and a tear spilled out, more welling up. He pulled her tighter to him and said, "It was a beautiful ceremony, and you both deserved time that belonged to just the two of you. Once I heard of the ceremony and its format, I wanted to give you to him. Kolyat could not speak for any but Thane, but I could speak for you. Thane pushed hard, and we argued quite a bit over it, but in the end I told him I wouldn't go at all if he didn't stop arguing, and I meant it. He gave in with not so much good grace as an attempt to ambush me in front of you in hopes you would convince me, but seeing you both in your Senny, I was proud of what I'd done and my role, and sure that staying was not the right choice. I meant what I said, that you both had lost time. I have had a great deal of time alone with you. I have had a great deal of time alone with Thane. I wanted you to be able to indulge each other for a week. And that is why. Before we even began, Thane sacrificed his potential relationship to you to spare me. He has spent months sacrificing himself to the Drell cause, to hoping for a better future. I wanted you to focus on him. I wished for once to be the one making a sacrifice of something meaningful." "That was stupid, and you should have been there, and that is possibly the most romantic thing I've ever heard." Garrus said against his skin, "So we're of the same mind. It being completely worth it, and being viciously jealous, She turned her head, kissed him, and said, "I do not deserve you." His eyes were teasing and his mouth was warming against her lips as he said, "Oh, that's true. So I outrank you romantically, Karim. And my tips are, when you miss him, come to me. He charged me to protect you. I can probably even kick your ass upon Aoife if you feel inclined." She smiled, back to balance and the full rush of reverie, no guilt, and no need to suffer, absolved of all sin by her men. She said, "You'll be my forbidden necromancer?" He laughed against her mouth. "Yes, your forbidden necromancer whose mother approves of us. Does this involve leather? I have to admit, I kind of miss it." "Right?